The first of the very few things we're going to be doing with complex numbers is using I so that we can rewrite roots of negative numbers. Now, you understand how square roots work, right? Square root of a number is what we would multiply by itself to get that number. So here we ask ourselves what times itself would be 9. The answer, of course, is 3. So the square root of 9 is just 3. What about negative 9? Obviously, it's not 3 because 3 times itself is positive 9. And it's not negative 3 either because negative 3 times negative 3 would be positive 9. So we have to think about this a little bit differently. And here's how we think about it. When we simplify roots, we look for two numbers that multiply together to be this thing under here. So we think of this as 9 times negative 1. And then we can separate this into two square roots. Square root of 9, square root of negative 1. The square root of 9 we know is 3. The square root of negative 1 we know is I. So there you go. Now, you don't really have to go through this process every time. Just remember, if the number you're taking the square root of is negative, just pop an I on there because you know you could factor out the negative 1 and the square root of the negative 1 will give you I. So the square root of negative 16, well, we know it's going to be an I because it's negative. The square root of 16 is 4. So 4i. Simple. Square root of negative 25 made negative, just leave the negative out front. And the square root of negative 25, of course, is going to be 5, but since it's negative, pop an I on there. Right? Really simple. Of course, we're going to have to make it a little bit more complicated or it wouldn't be college algebra, right? Something like the square root of negative 20. We don't have a nice number for the square root of negative 20, but we can reduce the square root of 20. Okay, 20 is 4 times 5. So we can think of this as the square root of 4 times 5 times negative 1. The square root of 4 we know is 2. The square root of 5, we can't simplify that any. We just leave it the square root of 5. And the square root of negative 1 is I. And for God knows what reason, we don't put the I over here. We put the I between the nice number part and the radical part. So 2i root 5 would be our answer there. For the square root of 50, we need to find a factor of 50 we can take the square root of, which is easy. That's 25. And then the other factor would be 2. And then we get our negative 1. So the square root of 25 is 5. The square root of 2 stays the square root of 2. And the square root of negative 1 is I, which goes, again, no idea why, but between the two. Now, MyMathLab's going to throw one like this at you, I believe, and I'm not really certain why. I'm not going to bother with anything like this, but sometimes the number under the radical is something we can totally take the square root of. Sometimes it's something that needs to be simplified, and then sometimes it's something that we can't deal with at all, right? 33 doesn't have any nice factors that we can take the square root of. So we're just going to leave this negative. We're going to leave the square root of 33 as it is, but since the 33 was negative, pop an I on there. And I'm not really sure if that's going to be I times the square root of 33. I don't remember exactly which one it's going to be, but it's going to be one of those. Right? Pretty simple stuff. You can do some of these on your calculator. If you want to be able to do them on your calculator, you do the square root of negative 9, close parentheses, and hit enter. It'll say non-real answer. That's because our calculator is not set up by default to understand complex numbers and roots of negatives. So what we want to do is go to mode and arrow down to where it says real a plus bi or re to the theta I. You don't want to mess around with that. That's math major territory there. So select a plus bi, and we can go back to our home screen and try again. The square root of negative 9, and it'll tell us that it's 3i. Okay, so if you want to be able to do these on your calculators to check, set it up that way. It's not going to be all that much help, though, because it's not going to do like the square root of negative 20 for you. It's going to give you a decimal approximation there, and I'm not going to want a decimal approximation. Neither is MyMathLab. We're going to want the 2i square root of 5. later.